shall we talk about Eddie/Suzy Izzard, who's been given an honorary degree by honorary doctorate, I should say, by Sussex University. Sussex, notable, interestingly, because that was the place where Kathleen Stock was hounded out, and actually Sussex was given a rather large fine because of its basically its procedures that were threatening free speech. Tom, what have you made of this episode?
No, it's a grim irony, isn't it? The university that became notorious for allowing a very esteemed philosopher to be intimidated, hounded out of her post because she happened to believe that a man can't become a woman, is now celebrating a man who thinks he's a woman. I mean, it's the sort of pick that, of course, Sussex University down there near Brighton probably would select. I mean, these things are ultimately just kind of promotional exercises, a way to get a bit of press. But the fact that it has kind of blown back on them, I think, is telling about how, I think a lot of anyone who watched the whole Kathleen Stock saga, it was such a grim spectacle. And it's something that I think is almost misremembered as just a few students kind of protesting or whatever. You know, we're talking death threats and police having to put a panic button in her home and constantly being menaced on campus. I mean, it was a real ugly misogyny and bigotry which built up there around the trans activist set. So for Sussex to do this, sort of thing they would do, of course, but it does again just highlight that whole saga which continues to haunt them, not just reputationally, but in terms of this Office for Students £500,000 fine that they were levelled with for it.
And Colin, I mean, if you're reading about about Suzy's honorary degree, you'll see all of the pronouns described used she, her. Is that really, I mean, doesn't that do disservice to journalism? Doesn't that discredit journalism when people do that?
You know, when you emailed me today and said we'd be talking about this, I did a bit of Googling and came across the Daily Mail story online, and the Mail were at it. You know, she says her honorary degree. It's difficult. We were talking about this off air, weren't we? It's difficult, even in an institution which seems to have, you know, a strong ideological perspective like the Mail Group, for your editorial bit to run through the newsroom, because at the end of the day, there's some office junior on 25k at best a year banging out this stuff because it's a high volume industry now, and it's not getting all the sort of editorial checks it might have done. So this sort of thing happens. I mean, that's my best guess, because I can't believe that the Mail is saying Eddie Izzard, you know, she, her. Really, is that what we're saying? Just to digress a little bit, I went to my daughter's graduation ceremony 5 weeks ago. I won't say which university. And it was a lovely ceremony, but as I walked in, I thought, I wonder how woke this is going to be.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
It's a lovely medieval setting. You know, and sure enough, we weren't very far into it before somebody went up to get their degree, looking quite embarrassed with a little Palestinian flag, and in a fairly civil, genteel way, hands over a flag. The Vice-Chancellor accepts a little Palestinian flag, puts it down. Okay, fine. We get to the end of the ceremony, and then I'm ready to go for a drink. And they say, okay, we've got a Professor X who's collecting his honorary doctorate today. I mean, I can't vouch for his scientific bona fides. The way, as they listed his achievements, he could have been Watson and Crick. He'd be clearly a scientist of some standing. But his big contribution, and the one he was proudest of, was setting up a foundation which allowed for black students to get free tuition and to get their living costs paid for. And at the end of the speech, there were a few people in the hall, and because it was there were science degrees, I think a lot of the parents in there were, you know, this is the first child from our family that's been to university.
Right, yeah.
I mean, and I looked at 2 or 3 down on my right, there was a guy with old-fashioned tats, and he crossed his arms as at the end of this speech, and people were clapping, and quite a few people were not clapping. Because, I mean, even in the professor's speech, he even invoked Martin Luther King talking, you know, and without any irony, you know, let somebody not be judged by their colour. Here's a man judging people entirely by their colour. And I thought, there are lots of working class parents in here who would love to see their kids enjoy the benefits of free tuition fees as given by this Professor Foundation that is created. But the broader point is, as with Sussex, you've got this closed loop that thinks it's okay to lionize people like Eddie Izzard. I mean, you know, I admire. I found him very funny as a stand-up. You know, his marathon running was incredible. The lippy and the plastic tits, I'm not so sure about. But you know, in fact, I'm pretty sure about. They're not great. But it's the closed loop. It's academia, and actually, as we've discovered in the last 15, 20 years, it's also the corporate world. One of the reasons I left Sky was because, let's have an inclusive language guide. And I thought, well, that's fine, but put it to the people who work here. See what those Nigerian security guards and the Filipino cleaners and me and everybody else think about your potty idea. But they don't want to do it. They want to enter politics with no democratic assent, and that's shit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
I mean, Eddie Izzard is a funny one as well, because in himself kind of represents the fact that despite transgenderism being presented as something kind of eternal, you'll find it in all societies going back millennia. He himself never used to refer to himself as a woman. He was a transvestite. That was something that for the majority of his career and his time in public life, he was quite happy to refer to himself to. And about 5 minutes ago, he decides he's a woman. I mean, it's a telling example of just because we're so presentist these days, and there's a tendency to obviously rewrite history to make it more in line with what identitarians want to be true. Even in his own career and the way in which he talks about himself, I think is a telling reminder of the social contagion
about what you call him, because he was for a while quite relaxed about it.
He does say he doesn't mind if you call him Eddie or Susie or what pronouns.
Yeah,
but he does quite famously does use the women's loo. And there's a point in his one of his memoirs where he talks about the first time he ever entered a women's loo, and he was challenged by 3 teenage girls who said, "What are you doing in here?" And he then chases after them and barks at them. And you think in his head, he's the victim in this. In everyone else's head, you're thinking that should have been your lesson. That should have been, you were told not to do this. It's creeping people out. Stop it. But apparently not. Been given the support of the great and the good.
Or at least Sussex University.